Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions, back to the show. We have Amy Weiss. How you doing, Amy?
I'm great, Danny. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Cool. So me and Amy were talking prior to the show about the kind of content we want to cover. So we thought we've as Seller Sessions, we're at nearly 900 episodes or so, and you can go back and look at the history. We've covered everywhere from India, China, Pakistan, the UK. So today, I thought it'd be a good idea to compare the options from three different countries, the upsides and the downsides. So I'll bring in the element of a UK and chip into some of China. You're going to cover the US. I have sourced in the US, but didn't launch a US domestic product through sourcing in the US. And we'll also cover Mexico as well. So it'd be nice to do like a roundup. So let's start with the first thing for me. Out of all of them, the most attention that you will get and the speed of response, I would argue pound for pound is China.
100%. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
they're light years ahead of everybody else when it comes to delivering from cradle to grave, right?
Yeah.
Like making sure your whole product life cycle is done. And it's because we put around the world, we put our intention and attention on China and helped them become where they are today.
And also, it's in their fabric to serve their customer, their fast response time. So I know we're dealing with American companies, and I know we're dealing with the UK. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth. You have to do Google search, and then you have a series of phrases: white label, private label, and then you've got things like for packaging, free issuing, and stuff like that. As you start to piece all this stuff together, and normally the minimum MOQs are just astronomical. And I'll mention a bit later how I got around an issue with bottles that was a minimum MOQ of 60. So talk to me, you've sourced in the US domestically. Talk to me about some of those experiences that you've had.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me about sourcing from the US, and just I see it in Facebook groups all the time too. That's like, and even on our Mexico trip post, people are asking, well, I want to source from the US, how can I get a supplier in the US? And people don't realize, and this is key, anywhere you go to source is not China. You cannot reach out to a supplier in the US and treat them like you talk to a supplier in China. You can't do it in Mexico. You can't do it in the UK. You just can't. You have to know, number one, your manufacturing process and what your product is called in the language of suppliers, right? What that manufacturing process is called in their language. As Danny mentioned, you got to know the language, right? But for me, because I was doing a private label product that I was developing myself, I had to actually sell it to them because most of the private label, so if you're doing like supplements or you're doing a grocery product or a skincare product, that's a factory in the US that you're going to find that's used to white labeling things for people. That's normal. Like you can call them up and you say, I'm trying to put this skin cream together. Can you help me with formulary? And they're going to have high MOQs, but you're going to be able to order from them in nearly the same way you're able to order from China. Most of them have like labeling and everything packaging. But if you're developing a private label product in any other category, you are going to have to know your process, know your company, know your business plan, and you're going to have to be able to sell it to them. I had to call several.
And the bill of materials is always very handy as well. If people don't understand what that is, just the components run into the spreadsheet, how your product's broken down. If you're able to source these independently, because one of the big things is with any of the companies that offer private label, generally they mark it up by about 75%, if not more. So that's going to not kill your margins, but it puts you at a deficit.
And the thing to know about most of those types of factories in the US is that they're already owned by brands manufacturing their own products. How these factories ended up in the US is because we took our focus off of manufacturing, we moved everything offshore. So most of the factories that remain in the US that you'll find on Thomas Net, stuff like that, they're manufacturing their own goods. So they don't want to bring your giant injection mold onto their floor if you seem like you don't know what you're doing and you might not be worth their time, right? They have to fit you into their existing production. And so it's very tough. Like we had a client that sourced from the US, and he was able, it was a wood product, and he was able to find a cabinet maker that could make some of his product once in a while, could run it through, right? But it really requires a partnership. It requires talking, requires understanding your process, and really, you know, making the right partnership. It's not like you're just outsourcing the job. It's more like, okay, we're working together. We're going to figure this out together. And you're going to find that in any country outside of China, that you're going to have to treat it like that. You're going to have to make it more of your partner. Like, okay, you know, Tim was talking about how with Guatemala, he had to actually buy them some tools. And then they were able, you know, he bought the tooling, and then they were able to actually have a really great production line for him. But the bottom line is, we got to work together. We have to have more of a business partnership when we're working with suppliers outside of China.
I think the one area that I know of that it's not that it's easier, but if you look at something like supplements, they're well laid out for domestic anyway, because no one really wants to buy supplements from overseas. So that's an area which is obviously in most cases is very tough. You have to work to existing formulas and stuff. They generally walk you through the paperwork and stuff, but there are going to be products that they've got to be suited for the territory as well. You know, we know that in China, it's kind of broken by provinces where their stronger assets are, you know, in terms of what they're manufacturing, the access to materials and stuff like that. And with what's going on in the world with the war and everything else, we know material costs are going up. Logistics has been in the toilet and stuff. So domestic pays dividends in some cases, as long as you've got the attribute where you can source these materials and, you know, you're not going to rely on someone holding your hand. You know exactly what you want, whether it's specific designs, a bill of materials, a type of materials, and know that you can source those so that when you are being priced, you're not going to get caught out with their markup on each individual item.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, Danny, in terms of like expecting a factory that's outside of China, other than supplements or skincare, like that's already well established.
Sorry, skincare is another one.
Yeah. Other than something like that, you can't really expect them to also do your packaging, to also do your shipping or fulfillment, like to do your warehousing. You're not going to get that in any other country unless you work really closely with that manufacturer. So I think it's important for us all to remember that most raw materials are also coming from China. So even if, you know, we find a factory in the US or we find a factory in Mexico, I actually went to source some of my flooring from Mexico. And I found a supplier that makes almost the exact type that I would like to do in Mexico. And I asked them for a quote, and the quote was what I charged retail for my product. And I was like, okay, this isn't going to work, right? But when I think about it, what they're doing is they're getting basically the raw materials from China, and they're just doing the finishing of the goods.
We have this in the UK, like with packaging. Someone might say it's a 7-week lead time. Effectively, what they're doing is they're ordering it all from China.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so what we can do is we can use our existing relationship. So I can go back to that supplier in Mexico, for example, and I can go, hey, I've already got relationships. I can get these raw materials probably cheaper than you can, and we can work together. And now you can become, you know, instead of right now, my biggest pain points for working with China are obviously the lead times. They've just been insane. I'm over a year late, 1 year late on one of my newer products that I just launched. And it's like they screwed up the order first. Now they had to remake it. Now they're shut down due to COVID. So for me, it's worth the extra work if I can get it made in Mexico. Like if I can reduce the raw material, if I can work with that supplier, reduce the raw material cost for them and me, and we can work together to finish the goods in Mexico. Now the country of origin changes to Mexico. I have free trade between Mexico and the USA. And then I've only got 2 days of shipping time to the US versus my 30 days that I'm dealing with in China right now with port congestion and everything. And then the other big thing is that I can change my logistics over to Mexico as well. So, I mean, whether I'm working with a factory in the US or Mexico or anywhere in the world, I want to keep that in mind and utilize the knowledge and relationships that I have in China to be able to work together, because maybe working with that supplier, like you worked with the one in the UK that was requiring you to have like 40,000, you know, MOQ, When you work together and you become more partners and you're like, hey man, I've got resources, you've got resources, let's work together, let's see what we can do. I mean, look at what that would do for me in the long run in terms of my lead times and everything else, because raw materials are pretty easy to export out and get moving, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So just to bounce off your point, because you were talking about location to the factory and everything else. So just to run over the UK example that can be extrapolated for US or wherever, is that when we looked at this product and it would have we used a third party company to private label it, it would have come out at £7.50 a unit, right? But I managed to get it down to about £2.32. And the way that we worked around it, when I spoke to all the factories that manufacture bottles, they had an MOQ of 60,000. But they said, look, what about standard bottles, which they've got a massive catalogue and they all work off a unique code. And here's a list of our partners. So instead of having to worry about 60,000, I could buy 500 from there. 500. Okay, so the increase comes is delivery costs. That's where you get a bit squeezed, right?
Yeah.
But you've always got a backup option. And so when I went back to the factory who could then do it all, which is going to be a slightly cheaper price, it still wasn't low enough to make this work. So what I did is I went, okay, you got the formula. What about if I send in the raw materials outside the formula, and then you give me a free issuing price? So I had a packaging itself, I had the bottle, the lid, swing tag, and then it had to be sealed in cellophane. And from all of that, and now I managed to break that down, is I end up using a printer that was very close to the factory to reduce that lead time on that side. The bottles are negotiated with 3 different companies just in case they went out of stock, but I made sure they are the same bottles. Now, you do have to check these because obviously with bottles and stuff, manufacturing at that level, when they're coming off at different runs, sometimes you'll get leaky bottles and things like that. But I managed to work out a free issuing price. They had the raw material, the formula, and then they free issued, they put it together. And then I also managed to hold stock there. So they become my 3PL. So that was a way of reducing all the costs to have products made and on the factory floor. To the point I got to is that I end up getting, in the end, about 30 days that stretched to 45 days in terms of terms with them, because you built that relationship. And the printers, I built a good relationship, which they would print and leave in stock before charging me. And so over that time, something that seemed impossible to do, we managed to work it out in 6 months. And that all came down to the bill of materials and working back from there.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I also do the same thing in China. I keep a lot of my stock with suppliers in China. And so, you know, you're right. If you have to move it multiple times, you're adding on costs every time. And then you should also think about your storage, right? If it doesn't cost you anything to leave it with your supplier, great. Like if they already have the space and they're going to keep it for you. But if you're already using 3PL warehousing outside of, you know, within the US or wherever, speaking of warehousing, I got some movement happening back here. We're shipping out stuff right now. But, you know, thinking about some alternative 3PL solutions, and that's something that we've discovered in Mexico, is that the labor costs are actually lower than China. And you can store your, you can get your warehousing, everything done there. And it's only 2 days to the US and to Amazon. So your storage and your 3PL can also be moved to other countries in the Americas. Mexico is a great location for that. But, you know, the US has a lot of options too, but there's so much fluidity right now with 3PLs. We really need to be making sure that we're interviewing multiple different types of 3PLs. We're understanding their capabilities, all of that.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, and the other side of that, just to go back, comparing China, US and Mexico, obviously with the way logistics are at the moment, everyone's very clear. You know, you need a lot more cash flow as well for turns of inventory. Some people are paying for their stock up front, and the lead times are being jammed up as well. Now, there's an improvement in the US and I'm sure in Mexico, but at the same time, can they get the scalability, or are you going to be in the queue just waiting? So there's that payoff and not so good. And the fact that if you do get a product and it scales, you know, you're doing a lot of units on a daily basis, then domestic or not, it can hit the curb in terms of being able to meet that capacity of manufacturing. So there are the upsides for China. There is also the downside, but you haven't got import and stuff. You've got ground logistics, obviously. Domestically, the US is far larger than, say, somewhere like the UK. So they can start to raise up some costs as well. So there's always a benefit cost analysis to be done.
And I think also we should think about whatever country we're sourcing from, we should also kind of study how ground transportation works in that country. Because India, for example, great country to source from. Megla's done a great job, like bringing new suppliers to our awareness, helping us really understand that. That's what we're trying to do with Mexico, right? But in India, for example, the ground transportation is hairy. Like it could take a long time for your products. Like if you're sourcing from, I think, the north area to actually get to the south. And there may be times with the roads, they're dirt roads, right? In some cases where, it might be very tough for you to get those products to the port. It's just a different situation. So also kind of researching how ground transportation and logistics work in the country that you're sourcing from. In Mexico, you have a few you have different provinces, different areas that are better for certain goods, right? But also looking at, okay, well, what are the roads like? Where is it that ground transportation coming through? Is that going to get clogged? How many days does it take to get from, there to there? It might not be 2 days. It might be 4 days if you're having to move from somewhere further south in Mexico, for example. So it's something to keep in mind no matter where you're sourcing from.
I can't remember off the top of my head because I remember Tim mentioned it, but Mexico, somewhere within the US, obviously, positioning because of Mexico can be there within 24 to 36 hours from Mexico to your 3PL. Do you know where that is? Is it California? I can't remember.
Well, it's any of the border areas, right? Because it's only like I'm in San Antonio, Texas. And it's about a 3-hour drive to the border of Mexico from San Antonio. So it just depends where you're at. And when I was in Los Angeles, there was a lot of Uber drivers that told me like they drive in from Mexico every day to drive Uber in Los Angeles. So it's actually not that far. That's pretty common to live in Mexico and work in the US. So that just kind of gives you an idea of there's people coming through the border every day legally, right? That and then this is pretty standard. So it's pretty easy. It's usually 24 to 48 hours. So let's say you're that's why there's so many logistics facilities right on the border, like so many border towns that are like masters of logistics and warehousing and 3PL, because how easy is that? And a lot of major retail brands in the US, that's what they do. They import all their raw materials to Mexico. They get things finished there. They get things kitted, packaged right in Mexico. And then they store, warehouse, and everything gets moved into the US on a regular basis. That way they've moved their whole supply chain. Now, of course, they might still be sourcing raw materials or almost finished goods from China in many cases, or from Taiwan or Vietnam or somewhere in Asia where the supply chain is a little bit more forward maybe for their product, but they're moving their logistics to South America and Latin America so that they have that shortened time frame and they're not relying on a 30-day shipping time to get it here.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. Which I think is really powerful and something that I can't wait to learn more about. I haven't mastered it yet because I haven't discovered all of this yet. So I'm excited to learn all about it and become that expert.
So a couple of things just as we finish off. I sold the last ticket to Branded by Women today. So Seller Sessions sold out, the dinner, and now Branded by Women. So I'm very pleased. We've now got 2 weeks to get in to just focus on executing the events. There's 6 parts to the event if you carry over the 2 days. You're coming to speak Branded by Women as well, and obviously you'll be at Seller Sessions. You're also got something coming up in Mexico. You're doing a trip, right?
Yep, definitely. We are doing the Mexico trip. You can learn more at themexicotrip.com, and that's from June 4th through the 9th is actually the sourcing trip. But we're also doing a trade show there. So if you're just wanting to go to Mexico City and attend our trade show, that's sponsored by Alibaba, and we are trying to get as many manufacturers, sourcing agents, logistics providers as possible there for you. This is the first trade show of its kind to actually bring together micro brands from around the world to meet suppliers and logistics providers and sourcing experts in Mexico. And that's going to be at the World Trade Center, June the 8th. And you can learn more and register for free. We're also doing an e-commerce connect event that night. You can learn more and register for free at evolatam.com. That's EVOLATAM.com.
And we'll put that in the show notes. But congratulations to get a company the size of Alibaba on board as well. That's, that's next level. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. The big thing about Alibaba being involved is that they are actually planning a major move into Latin America in the next few years. And when they saw that we were doing this, they said, well, this is a no-brainer. We need to be involved. It's, we're already moving in that direction anyway. They're not ready to move fully yet. It's part of their plan, right? So they were just so excited to be part of what we're doing. And we were just honored to have them, I mean, what a cool thing, for sure.
Yeah, indeed. What is the best way that people can reach you?
Yeah, so visit us at amazingathome.com. You can always do that. We also have a Facebook group, Amazing at Home. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Instagram, all of that. The handle is always at Amazing at Home.
Excellent. Cool. Guys, thank you for joining us today. Amy, thank you for joining us. Sharon will be back in the chair tomorrow. Isabella back Monday. I'll see you Tuesday and Wednesday. Take care of yourself and your family. Much love, and I'll see you soon.